Hi everybody, Scott Schreiner here. As a Star Trek fan for most of my life, I thought it was time that I weighed in on what's going on in the world of Star Trek right now, because you know, it's a lot. I am about to give you a decidedly low-tech video here. You might see a little Star Trek Enterprise poster over my right shoulder. I was going to wear a Star Trek cap, which I know I have somewhere. I couldn't find it. I'm doing this off the cuff, so I thought I'd wear an Indians cap. Go Tribe. They start in the playoffs tomorrow. Anyway, if you're like me, when you see videos like this, you don't want a lot of chit-chat. You want to get right to the meat of it. So I'm going to get right to the meat of it, and let me start by saying this. This video will do two things. One, it will operate under the assumption that there are not one, but two new Star Trek TV shows on the air. That's right, there's Star Trek Discovery on CBS All Access, and then there's Fox's The Orville. One is officially a Star Trek show, and the other one is essentially a Star Trek show. And I'll get into why and why I want it to be part of this conversation. The other thing this video will do is it will contain spoilers. So I'm going to be talking like you're people that have either watched these shows, or you're people that haven't watched them but don't care that I'm going to delve into details. So, let's get our Trek on. I'm going to start with Discovery. Now, as I speak, there have been 3 episodes aired so far. They're entitled The Vulcan Hello, The Battle at the Binary Stars, and Context is for Kings. And I gotta say, just right off the bat, I am loving the names of these episodes. You know, the original series had such fantastic, creative, evocative episode titles. A Piece of the Action, A Taste of Armageddon, The City on the Edge of Forever, For the World is Hollow, and I Have Touched the Sky. But by and large, many of the later Trek incarnations, and I've said this before, got really lazy with their titles. Now, Deep Space Nine was often an exception. They had some pretty good ones like Far Beyond the Stars and In the Pale Moonlight. But let me give you some random samplings of typical Next Generation and Voyager titles, okay? Schisms, Disaster, Lessons, Phage, Threshold, Void, Investigations. Yeah, even one of the Star Trek Next Generation movies was guilty of this. Insurrection. That was its title. See, these are titles that talk about what technical things the episode contains. That's boring. Really good episode titles tell you what the story means, what it's trying to say. Game of Thrones and The West Wing are 2 great examples where knowing the episode title can actually deepen your appreciation for the episode itself. You know what I mean? So I'm really glad to see that Discovery is off to a good start in that area. But enough about titles. Let's talk about content. Now, I think it's safe to say that on Sunday, September 24th, just a few weeks after the 51st anniversary of the original, we witnessed the beginning of a Star Trek show, which was about as far from those original series episodes as you can imagine. But more than that, it's completely different from any Star Trek we've seen, up to and including the last Trek show, Enterprise. And if you want to feel old, remember that show ended in 2005. But really, from the moment it comes on the air, Discovery is it's a completely different animal from any Star Trek we've seen before. This is Star Trek 2017, people. This is, at the outset, it certainly seems to me to be sort of darker, more pessimistic, I suppose, than previous Treks. Now, I know people have made comparisons to Deep Space Nine, which I love. I love all the Star Treks, but you know, they're saying that show was grittier than your average Star Trek, and that's, you know, might have been a predecessor to Discovery, but this is different. This is different, you guys. Deep Space Nine always felt like Star Trek to me. It always felt like Star Trek to me. Discovery doesn't yet. You know, it's got Starfleet and the Federation, it's got Klingons, it's got Vulcans, it's got communicators and phasers, and it's got a huge amount of references to previous Star Treks, both big, like the story that Michael Burnham told in the 3rd episode about Amanda, Spock's mother, to tiny little deep cuts, like a reference to the Z Magnes Prize. Did you catch that? Which was like the outer space equivalent of the Nobel Prize. It was mentioned in an original series episode in the 3rd season. You know, calling a couple of the Starfleet ships the T-Plana Hoth and the Shran, T'Plana Hoth was the matron of Vulcan philosophy. Shran was the recurring Andorian character that was friends with Jonathan Archer, and sometimes, I guess he was frenemies with Jonathan Archer on Enterprise. Stuff like that. It's got all those things, okay? Discovery has got all those things, but what we see, what we feel when we watch this is to me, fundamentally different than what Star Trek has traditionally given us. It's really hard to put my finger on this, and I want to say it's tone and atmosphere. Like I've got those words on the tip of my tongue, but I don't think that's it. I think it's simpler than that. I think it's format. This is the first Star Trek show to be born in the era of streaming and binge watching. It feels like a long movie. You know, like it's going to be one story rather than a different journey every week. For all the stuff that DS9, Trek's most serialized show up to now, did with the Dominion War being an ongoing arc. For the most part with that show, you basically had standalone episodes like TOS and TNG, the original series, and The Next Generation. That's what those abbreviations mean. If you're watching this, you know that. Anyway, same with Voyager, certainly with Enterprise. So let's talk about specifics. Discovery looks amazing. You know, I mean, look at it. It's gorgeous. No Trek show has ever looked this technically impressive. Now, I am the first to say that I don't care about special effects. I don't care. You know, I'm going to say this right now. If you are one of those people, and I've dealt with you people all my life, who say that you can't get into the original series because it has cheesy special effects, you have just so completely missed the point that I honestly feel sorry for you. I really do. The experience of watching the original series just cannot be equaled. What I love about the original series now is that I can watch any given episode twice in a row, once taking it completely seriously and once completely making fun of it, and enjoy it tremendously. Either way, thoroughly, either way. So effects don't matter, okay? But that said, this show, Discovery, looks like big budget. I mentioned Game of Thrones earlier. Those who watch that show like me, it's a movie every week. It's movie quality on that screen every week. That's what we're getting with Discover, you guys. That's what we're getting with Discover. Like Richard Attenborough said, they spared no expense. Did you get that? I'll bet you did. So, what about the people? Okay, what about the people on this show? Well, having watched every single Star Trek pilot on the night it aired originally, except the original series when I wasn't alive, I found it interesting how little I know the characters yet, you know, after 3 episodes. Michael Burnham, you know, honestly, I don't know if I like. I don't know. I very much like the actress. I think it's a really interesting performance. My jury is still out about what I think of Michael as a character. You know, I love the idea of a Star Trek lead who is not a captain. It's a really interesting choice to center on someone other than the captain. Particularly interesting to center on someone who's a mutineer. You know, they set you up almost in the pilot. The early scenes when you had Michelle Yeoh's character saying, "It's time for you to have your own command, Michael." It's almost deceptively familiar to us as longtime Star Trek fans. You know, like where this is going to be. We're setting up that this is going to be the lead of the show, going to have their own ship. That would be more traditional Star Trek, right? But then she turns on her captain for reasons that she thinks are right, but she disobeys a direct order and attacks her captain. Attacks her captain! Now, how many times did we see Jim Kirk disobey his superiors? Or any number of Star Trek characters do that. Again, you might have even said this was deceptively familiar because we had been here before. But what's different is what happens to Michael, right? It backfires on her. Oh man, no, there is none of this, "Hey, James T. Kirk, you can steal a ship and defy the Prime Directive on multiple occasions, and what's your punishment? You will be given the duties for which you have repeatedly demonstrated unswerving ability, the command of a starship." You know, I love moments like that, okay? But that ain't what we're getting here with Discovery, folks. That's not what we're getting. Michael is disgraced. If you've gotten as far as the 3rd episode, she is a pariah. You realize in the 3rd episode, it's like if there had been a TV show based on the Ensign Ro character in The Next Generation, which, by the way, would have been a great idea. So Michael has an interesting path ahead of her. I will say I think it's a bold choice, interesting choice. to make your main character someone who is so aloof at times. I can't figure her out yet. The idea is that she was raised by Vulcans, specifically Sarek, which is a really cool idea, which is very interesting, but it makes for interesting things as far as the plot, or as far as the characterization goes. It's going to maybe take us a little bit longer to get to know her. I don't know if that's a bad thing in the era of binge watching. Now, the plot, I mean, I don't know what's going on with this show. And I like that I don't know what's going on. But I mean, in the third episode, we had like what looks like some sort of monsters on this ship that are like killing Klingons, and we've got some sort of a propulsion system that is organic and can take you 90 light years in 5 seconds or something. All these things, like that method of propulsion clearly doesn't work, or this technology that the Discovery captain is trying to work on covertly clearly does not survive to the later incarnations of the Star Trek timeline that we've seen. So something's going to happen here. I don't know what it is. I'm all in, though. I'm very interested in what's going on. I do want to talk about tone and atmosphere for a minute, because I saw a lot of reviews that said that this show Discovery is basically, it's the J.J. Abrams Star Trek show. That it's similar to the newer movies. Now, while I love those movies, I think they're very different from this. I respectfully disagree with people who say that. The new movies, think about how many times you laughed. There were lots of laughs and grins and smiles and fun in those movies. Now, how many times are you laughing during Discovery? I don't know about you guys, but there might have been a couple of smirks here and there, but this is a drama. And these, those new Star Trek films are wonderful, in my opinion, but they are lighthearted at their core. And the characters, the new versions of Kirk, Spock, and Bones and the rest of them, I can't say enough about those actors, Chris Pine, Zachary Quinto, and I mean, they're amazingly cast. I love those films. I hope they keep making them. But, they're archetypes, though. And this show, Discovery, is introducing us to characters who are going down journeys that we can't predict yet. We don't know who to like yet. Are we supposed to like these people? Maybe not. I love Anthony Rapp, for example, as an actor. Have for many years, ever since Adventures in Babysitting 30 years ago. That was for my sister. But Lieutenant Stamets, I mean, this guy seems like a pain in the butt, man. I mean, one thing all Star Trek shows shared in the past is that they were basically all people you would want to know and hang out with. My jury's out on these people with that, and maybe that's not a bad thing. Complexity in the characters. I'm all for that. So what's my opinion on this show? I guess I've said it already. I'm in. Okay, I'm invested. I'm interested to see where it's going. I think there's lots of potential. I think basically I may have to reserve my judgment, my final judgment, until this season / story arc is through, though. You know what I mean? Before I move on, the one thing I'll mention is the Klingons. Okay, look, they're a bit of a point of controversy in Discovery because they look different. Okay, now you'd think that after more than a half century of Star Trek changing how the Klingons look a lot, that people would be over this by now. I guess these new Klingons most closely resemble the ones we saw in Star Trek Into Darkness, but the truth is it doesn't matter what they look like. What is interesting to me is that they act differently than the Klingons we've seen before. They're more alien now than they've ever been. For all intents and purposes, to me, this is like a new version of the Klingons. I'm not really expecting, as much as I love a lot of the original series Klingons, and I love how the Klingons were treated in Next Gen and DS9, Shakespearean stuff with Worf and all the Klingon characters there really fleshed out that race. I'm just looking at this as a clean slate. This is clearly just a new version of a new alien race, and they're just calling it Klingons. We'll see where it goes. Now, let's move on to the Orville. I'll start by saying this. I saw a meme the other day about this show that said, that awkward moment when you realize that the Star Trek parody is actually better than the real Star Trek show. And that made me think, now, is Orville a parody? Certainly that's how it was marketed, right? And when you hear about a Star Trek type show from the guy that created the guy who's responsible for Family Guy, American Dad, and Ted, that's what you think it's going to be. but have you watched this thing? This is basically a Star Trek show. There's some jokes in it, and yes, the characters sometimes say things like, "You're a dick," but at its core, this is really a very sincere homage to the Star Treks of old. Now, that's where it gets a little weird, because, you know, if what you're looking for is a show that evokes the previous Star Trek shows and reminds you of those past incarnations, well, this is the show to watch, not Discovery. Orville's closest relative among its Star Trek cousins specifically is clearly the Next Generation. You can see elements that have been lifted from all the previous Star Trek shows, but Seth MacFarlane clearly has a soft spot for TNG. Being the Star Trek fan that he is, you know, in the pilot when he says to the Admiral, "I've always wanted to command an exploratory vessel," I mean, it's got to be Seth MacFarlane himself talking there. There's a lot of Galaxy Quest in this show, I think, which I've often said that is the honorary 14th Star Trek movie. Both of these shows have really deep-cut references in them, and I honestly wonder if the basic setup in the Orville of the first officer being the captain's ex wasn't inspired by Peter David's New Frontier Trek novels back in the mid-90s. I wouldn't be surprised, maybe I'm reaching, but in any case, you know, we were introduced to the crew of the Orville in the pilot in a much more traditional Star Trek-y way than Discovery presented. As I speak, there have been 4 episodes of the Orville aired so far. You met the crew in the first episode, you got to know them a bit, they went on their first mission together. Basic Star Trek, right? Whereas Discovery's first 2 hours were essentially backstory for the main character, and the third episode was more the pilot. You didn't even see the ship Discovery until the third episode. The characters, you know, on the Orville, they're much more recognizable as 2017 people. They're fairly archetypical. You've got your Spock Data character, that robot whose name I can't remember. You got your Worf character, Boros or something, I can't remember his name. But you've got your young green character who I like, the young woman in the show, and in the Orville, you know. This is the thing that's really surprised me. They are actually tackling issues in the same way a real Star Trek show would. I mean, did anybody expect this show to be talking about gender reassignment? As, for example, particularly as early as its third episode, no matter what you thought about that, that was like a subject that real Star Trek, like Next Gen or Voyager, or the original series would tackle. So anyway, I like both these shows, okay? I'm on board for both. A word, just in closing here, about the critical and audience response so far. It seems to me that I've been kind of monitoring it a bit, both on my own social media, my own friends, of which I have a lot of fellow Star Trek friends, and just sort of general internet stuff, reviews and the like, and it's been, on the whole, it's been fairly good in both cases. You know, both shows have already got their haters, and the haters gonna hate, and that's cool. People are passionate about Star Trek, you know. I do find it interesting that there was a big backlash against the Orville the week following its pilot, but the love for it seems to have grown each week, particularly since Discovery premiered. Now, what does that mean? I'm not sure, but I can't help but flash back to the fall of 2006 when you had two shows simultaneously debut about the same subject. Wow. Those 2 shows were Tina Fey's 30 Rock and Aaron Sorkin's Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip. Both were set backstage at a SNL-type variety show. One was a comedy, one was a drama, one got axed after 1 year, and the other ran for 7 seasons and won a ton of Emmys. Which was which? Well, which show have you heard of? But I love both those shows. I wish there had been room in audiences' hearts for both, so I hope this plays out differently for the Star Trek shows Discovery and Orville. And yes, they're both Star Trek shows, and I like them both. I'm enjoying them both. Thank you for listening. Have a great day. Live long and prosper.